looks like everybody's in. Hi there. Good, happy summer day to all of you. I'm Megan Jones, the Executive Director of ICEA. We're here today for 5 fatal Excel errors that cost estimators can't afford to miss from Joel Steendam from PerfectXL. He's going to be going over some pitfalls that you might fall into in Excel that I know a lot of you would definitely like to avoid. If you have questions for him, go ahead and put them in the chat for now. He's going to present for about 45 minutes, and then we'll get to your questions at the end. Of course, I will be online the entire time, so if you have a technical question, you can also send that in the chat. And yeah, thanks again. Take it away, Joel.
Great. Thanks so much for the introduction. Indeed, any questions or comments you have, please do throw them in the chat, because it's great to have a bit of that interaction towards the end. Then we can tackle some of those questions or things that might pop up. As a super quick introduction, my name is indeed Joel. I grew up in China, but spent about 4 years in the US as well as I was studying. Now I'm based in the Netherlands and work for a small company called PerfectXL. The goal of our company is to just sort of help Excel users around the world to eliminate some of those risks in Excel, which is exactly why we're talking about this topic. I have to say, I'm not a cost estimator. I have some experience building a couple of those models, but these errors will be generally quite applicable to most people that are building things in Excel. I've tried to gear them sort of towards the things that cost estimators might run into, but then you know that as a bit of a caveat. Our company provides some tools, some software around trying to mitigate risks in Excel. I'm going to be introducing that a little bit, but I'll be focusing really on what kinds of risks you run into in Excel. Try to focus on also how you could potentially avoid those with some native Excel functionality. And at the end of each sort of risk or error, we'll talk a little bit about how Excel tries to tackle these issues as well. So hopefully that's a good balance, that you get some clear information on how it could be done now in Excel, that you feel enthusiastic about potentially trying PerfectXL in the future, and that you get some really practical tips to be moving forward into. I have a presentation open, so I'll be clicking through some slides, but most of the time I'll just spend in Excel itself talking about some of these things and these functions. So just very generally, kind of the introduction of why it's important to talk about these kinds of things. Excel is super important. I think every cost estimator has used it at some point, or maybe still uses it today. It's super flexible. You can do a lot of things. When you enter some data, you instantly see some kind of result come forward. But I think its flexibility and its sort of wide use is also one of its downfalls. It's really easy when you can do anything to also make a mistake in some way. And these mistakes can be disastrous, especially when it comes to cost estimations, when you're trying to pitch or bid on a new project or something like that. There's the financial risk. I mean, a very small difference from a mathematical perspective, maybe a rounding error or a reference that just goes wrong, might only have a 1% impact on the total outcome of your projection, but that is a big sum when you're talking about really big projects. The reputation risk is a big deal as well. I think all of you will know that repeat customers will be a lot less if your Excel models are full of mistakes and errors, and if those kinds of things are caught by others. And then I think that auditability part is really important as well. If you in the future want to rely on templates that you built in the past, or if you want to be able to check a model that maybe a colleague or someone else has sent you, then it's really important to have clear sort of models that are risk-free, error-free. And we're going to look at a couple of those things now. The first kind of error I wanted to talk about was just kind of the classic Excel errors, what maybe most people think about when something's going wrong in a model. Those hash refs or divided by zeros or hash browns, not as much. Excel errors are possible to spot in cells in most cases, but I'm going to talk about a couple of cases in which it's really difficult to spot it from the cell itself as well. And Excel errors are definitely something that most users will want to track down and be able to mitigate in their files. I'm going to go ahead and use my fancy little hyperlink functionality, jump over to the Excel model, and here we've got a list of sort of the most common Excel errors that you might find. These hash refs, I'm sure you've run into before. It means something's going wrong with a reference. This happens really quickly when something's deleted in a file, maybe a row or column is removed that used to be referred to, and this can have huge effects across the model where suddenly your entire graph or end results or summary table refs out. You've got your divided by zero errors. This happens a lot in templates, and a lot of people just sort of accept it as, oh, there must be an empty cell that I need to fill later. Of course, it won't calculate through properly. So if you've got sums using things with a divided by zero, it's good to fix those. Hash NAs mean a value couldn't be found in some way, usually from a lookup function of some kind. You're probably all familiar with the index matches and VLOOKUPs, but also XLOOKUPs can have this as output. We've got spill ranges. This is relatively new functionality in Excel, but if you build up a reference to a range Excel now allows it to spill over multiple cells. And if there's anything in that range that's blocking it, then you'll get one of those spill errors, as you can see here. Yeah, definitely an issue that's good to be able to spot as well. We've got number errors. Something's wrong with the number. Maybe it's too big. It doesn't fit in the cell. It's overcomplicated. Nulls. Yeah, I'm going to jump through some of these. These are a little bit less common. Name that's not recognized, or calculation issue, like with newer functionality in Excel. Lambdas and stuff can negatively impact the calculation engine. And then you've got the first one that is often hidden to users is a variable error. So often when we're building up models, we've got some kind of condition that needs to be met before we continue with the calculation. With if statements is the most common way that this happens. In this case, I've got a really simple if statement. If A10 is empty, then we're going to fill it with hello and otherwise hash ref. What you'll see often in models is people don't understand why suddenly this error has been introduced or whatever it is. And often it's based on something that maybe is not in direct correlation to the error at all. So once I change this cell, this variable, maybe I'm inserting a new range, then suddenly my model breaks because there's something variable built in somewhere that is negatively impacting the outcome. Now, the frustrating thing is if you fill something into a cell, you're able to see these kinds of errors. But if you're just looking at the cell as a general overview, if you're not going formula by formula or line by line, it's really hard to spot these errors. And one of the sort of classic Excel tricks is to go to, if you use Control F, you can look for all the hash spaces. You can find all of the different places where a hash was found, and it'll give you an overview of all of those general errors in a general sense. Can be a really helpful tool, but it doesn't do a great job of spotting these kinds of variable errors in a general sense. Where PerfectXL, on the other hand, does analyze the entire file to check if there's any hash ref errors or other reference errors going on in the file. I'll show you that in just a second. This is a really simple example with a sort of table overview. If we're looking at how it might impact some data, I've built up just a really simple table here, which pulls in some information from this general product overview with these slightly convoluted formulas. What it's doing is it's filtering that other table based on two variables, a product name and a date. And this date is using either today's date or a manually entered date, which is calculated out in this date used column. And then we're calculating out 10 days back to get sort of the sales information from the last 10 days with this structure. Works great. It's super dynamic, or at least that's the hope. But if I want to look back from July 1st instead of July 24th, I might fill this into a cell, and then we'll see there was one of those variable errors in my cell. Super problematic. Definitely not a great way to have your dashboard built up, and definitely something that you'd like to fix. So I'm going to go ahead and pop over to this risk finder area up here. I've got this add-in installed. That's the software that we built as a company. And this risk analysis allows you to see any Excel errors that might be in the model. I've got an overview on the left here of different categories of issues. I'm going to ignore these down here. We've got things like hard-coded numbers and formulas, references to empty cells, and focus specifically on those Excel errors. If I click on this tab, I'll see there's a bunch of errors on that first worksheet. B2, B3, B4. You'll see, if I click through it, you'll see a screenshot of the actual error, the formula that's causing the issue. And then the interesting one is down here. I can see there's an if statement with a hash ref in here. And the interesting thing, I think what's really helpful to being able to quickly identify where an issue is coming from is the fact that we've separated out those seed errors, so the original place where the issue occurs, from the references to that error. Because our model is now full of hash ref errors, but we just want to focus on what's causing the issue originally. So again, I get a screenshot here of the issue. I get to see the formula that's causing the issue. I can jump over to this, and in a bigger model, you can imagine this is a huge advantage to be able to quickly go in and fix the issue. In this case, I just want that manual date. Instead of that ref range, I can see some things are going wrong with the calculation still, but this makes it a lot easier to sort of be able to identify some of these issues. So yeah, again, general sense, a bunch of errors you're going to be able to spot in the cell. Some are a little harder to spot. We also see sometimes that there's errors in things like named ranges. In the formulas tab, you've got an overview of things we've given a name to. In this case, I've given a name to the VAT, the VAT. If I try to reference that in a cell, then you'll see that it also pops up with an error. And this is also one of those things that our tools help to be able to eliminate and spot any errors in named ranges and stuff like that. Great, that's the first one. Very basic. I think we'll go a little bit more in depth as we go through it. And the way PerfectXL helps, I'm going to jump back to the cell really quick just to show you one more function. We also have a highlighter in the tab. As you can see, this is a live demonstration, so I'm not going to be covering everything perfect right away. We've got a highlighter tab, which allows us to highlight cells based on different variables. And one thing that's really helpful is we can highlight all of the error cells, which will just turn any cell with an error in it red, which makes it a lot easier to spot some of those risks in your page. And also show a list of those highlighted cells to be able to quickly jump to those ranges that we've given their color to. Perfect. So what we've covered here is, going all the way back, a couple of different tools from the PerfectXL's perspective to help solve those risks, a list of all errors. We've separated the seed errors from any references to those errors as well, and then the highlighter that gives some color to errors to be able to spot them more easily as well. Another big issue, I'm sure you guys never run into this, you've never made a mistake with formula consistency before, probably a super unfamiliar concept. Obviously kidding. I think this is one of the biggest shortcomings to Excel is that you're allowed to be super inconsistent in rows and columns with your formula usage. Makes it really hard to understand what somebody else is doing in Excel, but also makes it hard to update your own spreadsheets going back. Go ahead and click on the screenshot. Again, we've got a really simple example. I've got a little table here, which again is calculating, we've got some products, A, B, C, we've got some years across the top, and then we've got a total row, which is calculating a sum of that range. Super basic little table here. And here already, maybe the inclination for a lot of users would be to check that first formula, think, okay, this is good, and go on to the next range. Of course, in this case, I've implemented a little inconsistency here. We see we've got an average times 2.7. Someone's maybe trying to fudge their data a little bit, or from 2022, make it look like they're earning a little bit more than they are, or something like that, or that the costs, or whatever it might be, is more than expected. There is a cool trick in Excel to be able to spot these inconsistencies as well. If you select a range where you suspect there might be an inconsistency, I'm just using Shift and then arrow keys to go over it. Then if you do Control /, it'll jump to the first different formula. Now, this is super powerful already, I think, to be able to quickly spot any inconsistencies in formula ranges. The issue is it'll only find the first one in the range, and it has some shortcomings in terms of you don't really get colors around it. It's sometimes hard in bigger tables to understand exactly what's going on. And then again, that's why we at PerfectXL have a tool that adds some color to the cells to give a little bit more information as to what's going on. I use this drop down, highlight cells, consistent formulas. You'll see in one overview, I'm hiding the existing formatting, and you'll see that we've got one unique formula here in green, that's that sum, and then a different formula here in yellow, that's that average range. And you can imagine that as our sheet populates with more formulas, we'll get more colors, and each unique formula will get one unique color. Makes it really easy to spot where things are potentially going wrong. Again, super small example, super small table. I'm sure you would be able to spot this one pretty easily regardless, but sometimes we've got bigger ranges to deal with. Here I've got about 10,000 rows of dummy data that I've generated. It's got some information on a date, a product ID, a number of units sold, and it pulls in some information of the price per product from this little table over here. It does a sale value, so that unit price times the amount of units sold. And then we've got that times a VAT. In this case, I think I've got it at 21%. Yeah, there's a 21% sort of tax that's calculated over it, just to give an idea of how maybe some of these calculations would take place in a table. Now, usually you would hope that all of these formulas are just consistently applied to the range. There's some cool tricks to be able to do that with hotkeys in Excel as well. But as we know, Excel users are not always super consistent. And I don't know about you, I would go completely crazy if I have to go through 10,000 rows of data by hand, or just like be clicking through them with arrow keys or something like that. Definitely would take a long time to find anything that's potentially going wrong. The highlighter is a great way to spot some of those inconsistencies. I'll use that on this table in just a second as well. But I think for a lot of these issues, it's easy or easy-ish to find them if you know there's an error in a certain range, but it's difficult from a model as a whole perspective to know exactly where to look, because you expect most of the formula ranges to be consistent, and probably most of them will be, but you want to find that one that's broken, that sort of needle in the haystack where maybe something's going wrong. And that's, again, where that risk finder comes in super handy. So the PerfectXL risk finder allows me to, again, scan that file. Now I'm checking specifically for formula consistency, and they ignore those hard-coded numbers and formulas. I can see I've got a formula interrupted by data. It's in this big example. I can see in this range, F2 to F99999, really big range of data. I've got one interruption at F118. So if I go ahead and click on that screenshot, I'll jump directly to that cell, and I can indeed see the cell above it and the cell below it. our formulas, but somebody's gone in and hard coded something here. Again, relatively easy to fix. I just grab the formula above it, click and drag it down, then the issue is resolved. But it's going to be really hard to spot something on row 118 or row 9,999 when these kinds of inconsistencies take place. Also, I'm just going to put that back. I'll show you how that looks when we've got our highlights active. We can see here we've got that blue formula range, which is interrupted once by something that has no color because it's just a value. So it's not a different formula in this case. I can also generate a list of all highlighted cells. This just shows me anywhere on this sheet where we've applied a highlight to something, I'll get it in this list. And I can jump down to any differing formulas in the range as well. So I can see here on column F, row 9,513, I can jump directly to that formula cell and see that indeed there is an interruption here. Jump over to this range here, D9549. Again, a big chunk of formulas just slightly changed. That reference has shifted up one row. Maybe something was deleted in between. This happens really quickly in formula ranges as well. And here somebody's trying to fudge with the information. Somebody's added some extra value onto this, this sales sum. Now, the trick to avoid this when you're building out your own formulas is once you've set up your first formula and you're happy with it, you can use the Control-Shift key, do a down arrow, make sure you're selected all the way down to your range. And then if you press Control-D, it'll highlight, like copy that formula all the way down. So if you've set up your structure in a way that you can be consistent around those ranges, then it is super quick to be able to very quickly go ahead and apply the formulas across consistently. You can even do this for multiple cells at the same time, but in this way, you're able to very quickly make sure that all your formulas are unique. They're running across the ranges, and now we just have 3 clean formulas for each column running all the way across that range. Super quick, definitely solve some of those issues. And if you're just working with your own files, hopefully you avoid a lot of the inconsistencies by doing this. I'm going to pop back over to my presentation just to make sure I didn't miss anything here. Yeah, we've covered that highlighter to give some visual context as to where the consistent formulas are. I showed you in Excel the sort of backslash function, Control-D, Control-Shift to select the ranges, and that makes it a lot easier to spot some of those inconsistencies in ranges. And again, these are just 2 small examples, but once you start looking for inconsistencies, and I'm sure you do already look for inconsistencies, they're everywhere. It's shocking when you get a model from somebody else. They're trying to explain, no, in 2019, there was this difference, so it's okay that that formula is different. It just makes the file so hard to audit, to keep track of. Really important to keep those ranges as consistent as possible to make sure that, yeah, you don't end up with a sort of polyp painting of different formulas and colors all over the place. We also have some very hidden stuff that you can run into in Excel. Some of the things that I'm going to be covering here are relatively rare, but I think it's good to be aware that it's possible in Excel, especially if you're working with client files or you're receiving a file from somebody else. Some of you might use some of these tricks to hide something in your own models as well. But again, from that auditability perspective, we really suggest to mitigate the amount of times you're using funky functionality to hide stuff. Hidden things can be accidentally included in formulas, be really difficult to update and keep track of, and can contain sensitive information that you might lose track of over time. Just as an example, I'm going to show you how very hidden sheets work in Excel. I don't know if you've seen that before, but Boeing had a very hidden sheet in one of their models that they were sending to a contractor, and it had 200,000 rows of personally identifiable data. So 200,000 of their employees had like their address, their salary, their spouses even. There was a bunch of information leaked accidentally because of one of these very hidden sheets. So it's definitely important to avoid running into sticky situations like that. Go ahead and click on the screenshot. I'll jump to that file. Now we've just got a little simple example in front of us. I'm going to give you 2 or 3 seconds to see if you spot anything right away that's maybe hidden. I'm sure some of you will, with a sharp eye, instantly see some things. I think people that have been doing this a long time will probably see that here in the left side, we've got some row numbers missing. This row 3 looks like it does exist. It's been made really small. But over here between row 4 and row 6, there's clearly something hidden. That's the first kind of really basic thing to look for, I think, in models is those hidden rows and columns. A kind of fancy trick is if you click this little arrow in the top right and you right click on those columns, you can unhide every column in the range. And this doesn't just apply to columns that might be hidden. here. It also applies to if you've got a bunch of batch columns hidden across the ranges. If you want to, you can select the entire range and unhide all of those in one go. On the left side here in the different rows, we've got the same kind of concept. I can go in here and unhide those ranges. I'm able to spot them if I've been able to spot them. Again, these are the kinds of things that if you're looking for them, you're able to spot them. But if you don't know that they're in a model, it can be a real pain. And hidden information can be super problematic. Now, also looking at hidden information, another thing that users can do, and I've seen them do it in a lot of different models, is to create the same foreground as background color. What happens then is if people make some text white, it becomes really, really hard to spot. I've got a little bit of information here as well. If I change that text color to black, then you'll see that indeed there is some hidden information hiding out here. I'll pop this back, hide it back, because then later I can show you how with our tools we're able to spot all of these things. Another common thing is that people hide worksheets. I think there's completely nothing wrong with using the standard hide functionality of worksheets. If you've got a sort of complex calculation sheet that might not be relevant to the end user, the person that's filling in data or viewing a summary or building up a graph, it's completely fine to hide some stuff. If I click unhide here, I get a list of different places where something's been hidden. I've got this big example sheet, which was hidden away. You'll recognize this from the previous example. Completely fine to do this from time to time. I think it brings some risk with it, but we wouldn't call it an error necessarily by any means. I'm gonna go ahead and hide that again. But as you'll see from this unhide menu, there's just one worksheet here. There's no other worksheets in the file that I can access from native Excel. But unfortunately, a lot of cheeky modelers know a trick that by going to the developer tab, accessing the sort of Visual Basic framework where most people go to write code and little bits of VBA and stuff like that. What we'll see here is that I can go to a different worksheet like this price per product, I think it is, price per product. I see there is a third sheet in my model, so that hidden one was not the only one. And down here at visible, there's a status given to this worksheet. In this case, it's been given the status very hidden. If I go ahead and make it visible, then you'll see that it indeed exists. If I pop back over to my file, you'll see that price per product is back. And again, if I unhide big example, then we've got 3 different worksheets here. Super cheeky way to hide stuff that's really difficult to spot in native Excel. And if you have worked with certain entities, sometimes they do this to sort of hide their ISP in a model. So to put some extra information in a model somewhere, it's great to be able to spot this really quickly without going through the Visual Basic overview. I'm gonna go ahead and make this very hidden again. Everything's back into its hidden spot. We've got that original example that I just showed you, and then I'll show you how with the PerfectXL Risk Finder, again, pulling up that risk analysis, I'm able to see everything that's hidden in the file in no time. On the left here, we've got some hidden columns. That's that column E. We've got hidden rows, column row 5. A hidden worksheet, that big example, again, we're calling this an observation. You can unhide it right away from the tool here. The invisible cell values, that column I, we see here that the background color and foreground color are the same, and that very hidden worksheet. Again, if I just click here, I can unhide that worksheet in one go. I don't have to go all the way over to the developer tab. Some people don't even have the developer tab activated or are not allowed to access that VBA portion. So that can be super helpful to just be able to quickly jump to those things from here. I'm going to pop it back into very hidden really quick to show you one of our other tools as well. One of our other tools is less focused on the risk specifically, but tries to highlight sort of the overview or structure of a file. It's often important to separate things like inputs and calculations and outputs. That's where the PerfectXL Explore tool comes in really handy. It's also handy for spotting some of these cheeky hidden away elements or ideas. So I go ahead and click Visualize Model. You'll get a visual representation of the spreadsheet. I can see this simple example is kind of hanging out on its own. This price per product is a very hidden sheet, as I see here, highlighted in the legend at the bottom. This big example is a hidden sheet, and they're both, the big example is making use of this price per product. So there's some formula that's referencing that price per product range, and that's exactly what we saw in that previous example with the XLOOKUP as well. Being able to have just a full insight into which tabs are hidden, which tabs are there, which tabs are not there, can really help, especially when working with unfamiliar spreadsheets. You can imagine that this visualization blows up a lot when you've got a lot of different tabs and external references and links, but it can be really helpful to just quickly isolate anything that might be hidden away from you. And for yourself as well, to save yourself pain in the future if you're very hiding or hiding stuff away. 2 years down the line, you may not know what you were trying to do in a certain area anymore, and you might lose track of some of the information that you've got saved up in the file. So some fun little tricks there. And I think in Excel, some pretty scary stuff that you can never know what's all behind the scenes, because these hidden cells, these hidden rows and columns can still be used in formulas and have an impact on output. So if you've got some kind of summary or graph, it could be that this hidden information is also impacting the model in a way that's very difficult to see. Popping back over to my presentation. Yeah, the things we've just quickly covered are, oh, again, I forgot about the highlighter. I love the highlighter, but I often forget that it's there. I'm able to give colors to different cells, including invisible cell values. Of course, it'll go over to the special cells mode in that right side of the column, and it'll allow me to highlight anything that's been made hidden, been made invisible in the spreadsheet, to be able to spot that really, really quick. Makes it really easy to find some of those hidden values. Popping back over to the presentation, we covered that explore, that visualization, which helps you to spot hidden things and very hidden things, and also be able to jump to very hidden spreadsheets. We covered the risk finder, which gives you an overview of everything that's been hidden in the model in sort of one flat list, and then that highlighter, which quickly highlights anything that might be invisible or hidden in a file. Another big issue you can run into in Excel, especially, I don't know how much you guys make use of external databases or websites or things like that. I think it's often used for things like currency exchange rates. You're pulling in some information from somewhere outside of the file. And it's really important in many cases for that information to be up to date. Maybe for a cost estimation project, if you're trying to build a highway or road, maybe the live price of asphalt or cement or whatever it might be that's being calculated in might be relevant. And for doing that, you want to build some kind of external link or reference to something. And being able to check whether or not those references are up to date, I think, is really important as well. Here I've got a really simple example of a little table. We've got a reference to some kind of C drive location. For those of you with a sharp eye, you might have spotted right away that, well, here it says 2025 sales. Here we see in the formula that we are pulling in information from a file called data 2016. Clearly outdated, but again, if you're not going into the formulas or looking one by one, it can be really easy to miss something like this. And then you might be calculating something completely different than what you had originally hoped. I'm trying to avoid the chat, but I do see a question about the Power Query editor. We're going to cover that right here, because the sales input from Power Query is the next tab in the file here. So I think I'm going to be answering your question indirectly pretty much right away. Yeah, PerfectXL, sorry, not PerfectXL. In Excel, a lot of people build external links, direct links like this to a file. This is a bit of a risky way to pull in data from somewhere, because as soon as this A3 no longer exists in the other file, you've got an issue. You're sort of clicking and dragging a formula across range. You could sort of dynamically populate this by pulling in A2 to B13 or something. Then you'll get that spill formula function. What this allows you to do is pull in the information a little bit more dynamically. You'll just pull in that whole table with just one formula. This doesn't work in earlier versions of Excel, so I don't, depending on if you're on 365 or not, the latest versions of Excel, this can be a great functionality to pull in information a bit more dynamically. At least then you just have one formula that's doing sort of the heavy lifting. But yeah, in Excel, there's a couple of different ways to pull in information from external sources. One of those is just in a formula, write out sort of a pathway or click a cell in a different Excel file that you have open, and that'll pull in information from there. Whereas in more modern Excel, people often use something called Power Query to pull in data. Many of you may have used Power Query without necessarily knowing that you've used Power Query. Under the Data tab, there is a possibility to get data from different places. So you could be pulling it in from a database, from an Azure framework, from a file somewhere. It could just be a text file or an Excel file. In this case, we've got some information being pulled in from an Excel file. I can see here, if I go to edit queries, it's going to take me a small second to open up the Power Query editor. I can see here that we've defined a source. That's that C drive location, the same one that was in that formula. And we've navigated to the table within that source. So I've got a table of information, promoted some headers, which just pulls that month and sales into the header row. And then it changed, I think, some data types that does this automatically. I just click get data, I click the range that I wanted to select, and I was able to pull in some external information. In fact, let me just really quickly walk you through how that would look. Always good to learn some new stuff about things like Power Query, for example. I'll just pull it into a new tab. I'll go to data, I click get data from file from Excel workbook. Hopefully it'll pop me over. I go to my client docs to the webinar here, the external sources, and then I want to pull in the data not from 2016, but from 2025 instead. I'll just select that file, go ahead and click import. Now this will pull me into a sort of pre-Power Query overview thing. I can see here that this file just has one tab on it called data, and it just has sort of one table of information. The easiest way to use this is you just go ahead and click load, and without knowing it, you've used Power Query now. There's been some code written that grabs some data, it promotes some headers, it formats some things, and does a great job. If you click transform data, you'll go into that overview that I just showed you with the ability to change some types and some sources, aggregate some information, stuff like that. If I go ahead and click load, it'll pull in that information from that external source. And you'll see that little table formed with the data that I actually want, the most relevant data in this case. I'm going to go ahead and refresh this one as well. Actually, the really cool thing about Power Queries is you can refresh them so the code sort of sits in the file. But if you've got updates to your file, or you've got, for example, you can pull information out of multiple different Excels in a folder. You hit refresh, it'll just pull in the newest information from that range as well. So I've repopulated my old data from 2016, and I've got this new data overview from 2025, which is the more modern version. Now, somebody asked if PerfectXL can help in auditing these Power Queries. We certainly can. If you go ahead and click Visualize Model, you'll get that cool picture of the file again. We've got this random sheet hanging out. I'm not quite sure what that's doing. I think I must have created that by accident. Go ahead and delete that. Pop back over to visualization. We'll see that in that sales input, we're pulling in information from this data 2016. I converted that to one formula. So if I click on that, I'll see the formula that's actually pulling in that information. And it's really easy from this visualization to see which sources are being pulled in. So without having to go into the cells and formulas, I can see for a file, hey, if I'm working in 2025, it's weird to me that data from 2016 is being pulled into the file. In this way, you can see those formula connections, jump right to them, inspect that spot in your Excel file. If I pop back over to the Explore tool, you'll see here that data is being referenced through a query. So those are those steps that we just walked through in the Power Query editor. There's a source being selected. It's navigating to the data sheet. We've promoted some headers, which just makes those header rows change. And then we've changed the type as well. And you can jump directly to that location, either in the Power Query editor, or if you click the arrow under it, racing through this just a little bit, you're able to jump to that table in Excel as well, because that Power Query is being pulled in into a table in my Excel file. And that makes it a lot easier to audit some of these external references. I'm sure many of you have spent your time sort of filtering through the external links overview in Excel. I think it's really unhandy. If you don't have PerfectXL and you do want to see all of the different places where information is being pulled into the file, there is this, I have to jump around and look for it really quick. Maybe some data. Queries and connections overview, or workbook links. Yeah, this as well. So here you do have an overview of the different files that are being referenced somewhere in the file, which does help if you're trying to clean up like any old links that you don't want in the file anymore, or to be able to spot some of those things. This is a list of all the places where something's linked externally in Excel itself. And here you've got those two queries, which you're able to pull into. But for a big model, it's really helpful to have that sort of visual aid in understanding where the information is coming from and how it's being used and processed in the file. Great. That's some things about external information. Hopefully you got some tips for in Excel as well. You're able to see those links in the overview, be able to work with a little bit of Power Query. I still definitely think that PerfectXL Explorer is the way to go when you're wanting to visualize some of this stuff. Being able to very quickly identify anything external to the model that's being pulled in also makes it a lot easier to audit the formulas, the data, the information that you're seeing in front of you in the Excel file itself. Knowing what it's dependent on is super important. We have a lot of accountants that use this software as well. They want to see where information is coming from for their client. If they're pulling in information from some kind of account database somewhere, they want to see exactly where the data is coming from and how it's being used in any Excel file. Another thing that I'm sure you've never run into late night, you're trying to send a version over to your client, and unfortunately, either your colleague or maybe you have a kind of overview in your folder like this with a bunch of different versions of an Excel file. We've seen some really bad naming practices over the years with final, really final, V1 final production file. So I don't even think this is that unrealistic when you've got different people working with files that you get this sort of weird hubbub of different versions and names and stuff like that. And of course, it's really important to be using the latest version of a file when you're trying to send something over to a client, or also when you're just working for yourself. You want to be pulling up the most relevant or most recent version of a file. I do have to say, as sort of a caveat, if you're working in a SharePoint environment or you have that autosave functionality built into Excel, this has become easier over the years because it's less important to keep saving different versions of the file as you go. It allows you to sort of autosave and jump back to a previous version of the file. But I'm guessing many of you still work on sort of the desktop environment where you don't have that autosave functionality turned on, and it's really important to be able to spot which version of a file is the most relevant. So I'm going to jump over to a folder here. You'll be able to see all my preparation work for this. This is the presentation. Maybe now, randomly, good time to also say that I will be providing the presentation and all the files shown in this webinar afterwards as well. I can email them over, or I think Megan will put them on the website as well. She's going to mention that at the end of the call. But then you know that for anything that goes too fast, or anything you want to dive a little bit deeper into, we will be providing those resources towards the end here. Now, for issue number 5, we can see that there's a summary final from Billy and from Stevie. If I go ahead and open the summary final that Billy built, I think I still have it open somewhere. Maybe that's why this is doing weird stuff. Number 5 summary final, exactly over here. Yeah, this is a sort of dummy model that we sometimes use to present the software on for different scenarios. It's supposed to calculate how many trees were planted by a company over a certain period of time. You'll see there's a couple of different tabs and information. There's some data tabs, some overviews with different formulas, sums, filters, whatever it might be. I think it's really hard from an Excel perspective to be able to spot what's changed between two different versions of a model. The one thing, like a general tip that I can give, is if you go in this sort of snap screen overview at the top of the file, at the top of your screen, sorry, then you can sort of put two things side by side. Let's see if I can get this one to snap over as well. There you go. You can get two versions of a model side by side, and then you can do something called synchronous scrolling, I believe it's called, where we have view side by side with, for some reason, it's not grabbing this version of the, oh, I don't have enabled content here. Go into Excel, click this little view side by side button, and for some reason, it doesn't allow me in Excel to select the file I actually want, which is the summary final from Stevie. Maybe if I close out of this, let's try that one more time. Nope, doesn't let me. Anyway, point being, it's quite difficult in Excel to have a really good, clear overview of what's actually changed between two versions of the model. I see a lot of people with that side-by-side scrolling. If you scroll in one, then it scrolls in the other. But going row by row to try to understand what's changed or what might be different between the two files is so headache-inducing. And that's, of course, why we have PerfectXL Compare. What this does is very simply compares two different versions of a file. Go ahead and select that file from Stevie as well. And we can see if I flip them, you'll see either way, either direction that you have them. But you'll see a summary overview of the differences, what's changed between the two versions. I can see some insertions in the data, some edits, some deletions, some insertions in formula, some edits to the formula as well, some changes in structure. This is really important to be able to track because with things like row or column inserts, all of your data shifts. Makes it really hard also to view it side by side and see what's changed. But we're able to sort of algorithmically pick up on any of those changes in the model, sort of to preempt that issue. We're able to compare sort of row 2 with row 3 in the new file if a new row 2 has been inserted. And then any changes to the VBA code as well. I think we're one of the only compare tools that shows differences in the code. For some people, this is relevant. For some people, not so much. From the worksheets overview, we see per worksheet what's changing. And this already gives me a big hint that this data old sheet has been removed completely. I can see that all of the information on this tab has been removed. It looks like some information may be outdated, and it's been removed in Stevie's version of the file. So if I'm trying to sort of filter between the two and understand which of the two files I want to take, as someone that knows the model, of course, I can sort of filter through some of those formula changes, but having a tip like this, that a worksheet's been removed or has been inserted that maybe is very relevant to the file, then that's a good way to be able to spot what's changed between the two versions. In yellow here, we see anything that's edited on a specific tab, and in green, anything that's inserted, and then red, anything that's been removed. I can also view all differences. Here I can see, for example, that we've got a worksheet that was made visible, this footprint tab. We can see that a formula was changed to a value. I'm viewing that side by side right now, so I can see version 1 on the left and version 2 on the right. And also just show all changes. I'm going to close data old because there's a bunch of rows here, but you'll see different formulas, values changing to formulas, ref errors that are being solved. And for that VBA code, you're able to see exactly in which rows, which lines, there's been changes to the code. I think a super powerful way to just quickly be able to spot what's different between two files and hopefully help you identify which version of the file you actually want to be sending over to your client. Well, that was the 5th tip. And I think we said we've got 5 fatal errors in Excel. PerfectXL Compare helps to be able to identify the differences between two different versions. And oh, shoot, it looks like we do have a 6th error. Yeah, I called it 5 fatal errors in Excel, but every Excel user can make mistakes. I guess I probably made a mistake here as well. There is a 6th different kind of issue when it comes to calculations. You could have some faulty references, be counting things multiple times, or you could be missing some data in that overview. If I go ahead and click on the screenshot, maybe I can see what's going on. I can see some of the planning I did beforehand for this meeting as well. I can see the different tips here on the left, the different tip number, and indeed there is a 6th tip here. So I'm wondering what went wrong with the title. And I can see there's a little green arrow at the top. Of course, in Excel, I'm going to be able to spot what went wrong here. But I've got a count of this range, which is only going down to B9, which is only the 5th risk. Of course, if I update this to B10, then my title updates. And it's actually 6 fatal errors that cost estimators can't afford to miss. A professional validator has estimated that this tip is probably worth about $9 million US as well. So I think that it's really important to be able to catch some of those issues in files as well. Yeah, these are things that are really important to be able to catch in Excel. These longer cell reference expected are super common. We've got a sum of a range, and somebody's inserted a new row at the bottom. Maybe they fat fingered and just accidentally haven't selected all of the cells in a certain range. These kinds of things are super hard to track down, I think, in Excel as well. You have to really go cell by cell, row by row, be looking at formulas in this kind of view. And this is a really simple formula. Once you get stuff that's stacked and then nested functions, it's really hard to see from the colors which formulas are calculating over which ranges and stuff. One Excel tip I can give is that in modern Excel, you can select a much bigger range than what you need. For example, a column range or formula range or something like that. And then there's this little dot that you can add in front of a reference, which allows it just to select the filled portion of that range, which is really cool. Because here, it looks no different in the formula itself. But if we select a different cell, I can quickly show you what's actually happening here. If I select this range, it'll spill out and I get a bunch of zeros down here, which means Excel is looking at the values and the information in those cells and pulling it in as I'm referencing that range. But if I go ahead and add a little dot before this reference, you'll see it's just pulling in the cells that are actually filled. And I think this is a really powerful tip because a lot of the fear of why people sort of shorten their ranges or don't grab that extra space when a table could be filled or more information could come is just the calculation capacity. If you're referencing full rows, especially in sum ifs, lookups, and sums and stuff, it can cost Excel a lot of effort to be able to do those calculations. So being able to use these dot references is way more efficient. It's just taking the filled range in certain areas, and it just allows you to make much more efficient formulas that do catch that extra space under a table or range to be able to mitigate these kinds of risks. But as it happens, a lot of people will still make these kinds of errors. So of course, I want to show you how PerfectXL deals with this. I'm going to head over to that risk finder. It's becoming a crowd favorite, hopefully. I'm going to pop over to the longer cell reference expected because that's what we're looking at right now. And I can indeed see that there's a formula that refers to the range D5 to D9 while data populates D5 to D10. So I can click this link here to select the range that's currently being referenced, or I can select the whole range to see all of what probably should be referenced, or I can click on the screenshot to jump directly to that formula. Again, in this simple example, that's not really necessary functionality, but if it's spread across a big file with multiple tabs and sheets in different places, then this can be super, super helpful and impactful. In this bigger example as well, I guess my fix is still in here, which was definitely not supposed to be the case. See that dot reference. If somebody accidentally didn't select all of the cells, then for these massive ranges, it would be really hard to spot what's going on. If I go ahead and select this, I can scroll all the way down to the bottom of this range. Hope I don't speed past it. And you'll be able to see that there's a couple of cells at the bottom. People have inserted some rows that were not caught. Again, if I save the file, head over to the risk finder, you'll be able to see from that longer cell reference example that we see exactly which range is being pulled in, what the formula is doing. This doesn't just work for sums either. I think with this count example I had earlier, if I go ahead and put that back to 9, you should be able to see really quickly that we spot these things as well. Here we go. The count A is also included here. So all kinds of different formulas can have this issue where they're not referencing the full data range as expected. Now you'll probably see we've got this double count issue. It was triggered in the risk finder as well. We'll pop over to that in just a second. What happens sometimes is tables are built up where values are presented. This is a really fancy formula with a filter of the range with the sum wrapped over it. But essentially what it does is it looks in the big example range. It pulls out the month here, January, and it's referencing, it's pulling in a sum of all the sales for product A in January. That's great. And I do want a total on top, but it doesn't combine very well with a subtotal in between. So you can use the subtotal formula here, which allows you to reference that entire range and then not include the information in the subtotals. But if somebody's making a silly mistake, they might have referenced the entire range, in which case you're getting literally double the value of what actually should be here. And again, in that risk finder, we're able to very quickly spot any case in which things are being calculated multiple times. There's a whole list of cell references. I got a bunch of these stacked out. I did all 12 months, but you've got a formula that contains subtotals at intermediate results at B7, B13, B19, B25. I click on one of these links, I'll jump directly to that spot, and you'll see that that's all these subtotals going all the way down. Again, a great issue to try to avoid, and definitely something you don't want in your models if you're publishing them. But yeah, there's not a hidden secret seventh risk. Don't worry about that. We are running a little bit short on time. I want some time for questions at the end as well. I don't know what this code is doing here, but good to know. I've included just an overview of the tools that we've talked about today in the presentation as well with a little demo video. If you guys want to go back and watch that, it's about 1 minute per tool. Really quick sort of overview of what I've shown you today as well. The risk finder for finding risks in Excel models, PerfectXL Explorer for that beautiful visualization, compare to track the differences between two different versions, and then that highlighter to give colors to different cells and give a little bit more context as to what's going on there. Also, specifically for the ICE-AA, we want a way to sort of very easily give you access to the tool. We've thought about it internally, and we're willing to offer a 1-month pilot to the entire suite for just $10. Just gets your hands on the tools. You're able to run it through a couple of different files. All of our tools run offline, which means that none of your data is being processed on a server or being sent anywhere. And it just makes it a little bit easier to get that access. If you email us at info@perfectxl.com or me at joel@perfectxl.com, that information will be presented along with the files as well. But if you just email us, let us know that you were at this webinar, then I'm able to give you that discount and that sort of great deal to be able to very quickly get some access to tools, have a play around with it. I did a presentation sort of like this about 1.5 years ago, and some of the members of the team did become clients in the end, and I think they're very happy with it, which is great. And that's pretty much it for me. I saw some questions in the chat pop up already, but maybe Megan,
So
you could help me out.
I was reading the questions. I'm going to read the first one, but I think you should take a look at them because they all kind of go together.
Okay.
And I think you can form a kind of a good flow here. So the start off is asking whether or not PerfectXL can audit table formulas.
Yeah. It absolutely works with table formulas. I didn't work with tables. I don't know if I can just pull up a spreadsheet here. I think what the user is talking about is that I've got a bunch of sort of table structures looking kind of like this floating around the model. If you use Control T, then it implements a table. In this case, my table has headers. And what this allows me to do is in other formulas, I won't be referring to a cell range, but instead I'll be referring to part or a column of the table. Let me see if I can rename this really quick. I'll name it ICEAA, why not? Then in other places in the model, I can reference that ICEAA, and then I can select a specific column, like 2019, for example, and pull in data or information from there. And then I can do a sum of this again. Yeah, these are table references. I think I must have show formulas on or something like that. I don't know why that's doing that. Anyway, that's what tables look like in Excel. It makes your cell references look a little bit different. It gives some consistent structure to different formulas and stuff. And absolutely, PerfectXL's tools all work exactly the same with table references as they do with direct references to cells. So that's great. The next question I see is, can PerfectXL monitor or detect the overuse of the indirect function? Having too many instances of indirect can cause the workbook to become unstable. Absolutely. We see the indirect function as a volatile function. Let me see if I can write that out really quick. What this does is it indirectly references certain ranges. So if I want information from C9, I can pull in information, C7. I can pull information in based on text. So this is building a reference through an indirect to that cell C7 over here and pulling in that information. These are really risky formulas. It sort of breaks Excel's calculation structure. They're volatile, which means they calculate every time you make any change in your Excel file. Big pain. If you go over to the PerfectXL risk finder, you'll see that we have a specific heading here called error-prone functions, one of which is that indirect function. So it highlights any spot in the file with a cell reference as to where that indirect is being used. And if I head over to the library, you'll be able to see that in error-prone functions, we've got a bunch of stuff. So offsets and lookups. VLOOKUP is also seen as error-prone. Maybe that's a bit painful to some of you. We've got the updated XLOOKUP recently in Excel, which is much better than the VLOOKUP function. Excel no longer supports VLOOKUP even, so definitely worth looking into. But yeah, there's an overview of a bunch of different kinds of issues that we try to track down and try to offer some alternatives for how you can go about mitigating the risks of using some of those formulas. And then that last question around the Power Query editor, I can clearly see, all three questions came from Bruce. I can see that he's quite familiar with newer functionality in Excel as well. We're able to read out the Power Query, the encodes, as you probably saw in the visualization. Definitely please have a play around with it yourself. It's relatively new to the tool. I think we've had it in there for 3 or 4 months now. But we absolutely offer the ability to go in and check that encode and see exactly how that's being utilized in a file. Are there any other questions from anyone in the room? I see I sort of covered the 3 that were in the chat. I don't know if it went over some people's heads or if I went too fast.
Well, I'll just do a housekeeping or two, maybe get people's wheels turning. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We're going to have these, the recording of today's presentation and the slides and resources that Joel used up on the website early to middle of next week. So you can easily share those with your colleagues who couldn't make it today, or anybody else who might be interested in it. You know, it's funny, you were saying it, that when you said it, I don't know what Excel's doing here. Like, kind of a good thing, huh? Because it keeps you in business.
Yeah, no, keeps us going for sure. I mean, I have like 6 tabs open and I'm doing all kinds of funky stuff, so you can't fully blame Excel. But
that's true. There is a little user complication there, and I guess that's an instance of indirect function that causes the work be unstable.
Absolutely.
Well, with nobody else piping up, I hope everybody had a fantastic time here today and learned quite a bit. You can get in touch with Joel, and if you missed the email address, give it to us again one more time.
Yep. info@perfectxl.com, or my first name, Joel. You'll be able to see that at perfectxl.com.
And if anybody misses that or otherwise can't get it, go ahead and email us at ICEA@ICEAonline.org and we'll pass you along. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Joel. And I hope everybody has a fantastic rest of their day.